Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our co-host for this webinar is, again, Jane Faherty, who's the director of JumpStart at the Stamford Jewish Community Center. And she is also a special education advocate. Jane can introduce herself. We have a special guest that we will get to in a moment, Diane Ferber. I want to thank everybody for continuing to attend our webinars. This is going into our second plus year of finding your voice as a parent, taking ownership of your child's challenging educational journey as we continue with this never-ending pandemic. As I've said many times before, there's hope on the horizon, and I hope this time that will be coming true. We're continuing our Zoom webinars because we're a community of concerned parents, professionals, and we are still learning how to connect in order to get through these difficult times together. During the past year, we've been moderating a series of webinars to address various topics in these unprecedented times. The need to address the impact of your child's special education journey couldn't be greater, but as we've seen with the pandemic, the anxiety is pervasive, whether your child has an IEP or not. I think tonight's topic will be helpful to all families who are trying to struggle in these unprecedented times. We have questions that were presented to us. Unfortunately, some of them are not germane to tonight's topic, so Jane and I will try to leave some time towards the end and have Diane address some of the topics. Let me turn this over to Jane, who will discuss her background, what's new with her, and then we'll introduce our special guest, Diane Ferber.
Hi, so I'm Jane. I'm the director at the Stamford JCC for the JumpStart program. So JumpStart is a program for children with developmental disabilities, typically aged between 2 and 3, and most of them are referred to us from their pediatricians or birth to 3 providers and practitioners. And the program offers children with one-to-one support within a toddler preschool setting. In addition to that, I do create partnerships and have relationship with the school districts within Fairfield County as we transition those children into those schools when they turn 3. And I work with them in order to ensure that work with them and the parents in order to ensure that the children continue to receive the support and services they need. And in addition to that, I do create other partnerships within the community. JumpStars is an example of that, where we've collaborated with STAR to provide social, recreational, as well as educational programming for parents and caregivers within the community. So it's a pleasure to be here again tonight with you, Lawrence, and Diane, and look forward to our conversation tonight. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping issues. If you're presenting questions during tonight's webinar, we'd ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your computer screen and not the chat feature, which I will get to in a moment. In the chat on the right side of your computer, all of our contact information is there, websites, address, phone numbers. So that's where you should be looking for contact information. We get a request every webinar for copies of the webinar. If you've signed up, you will receive a copy following tonight's webinar. I do have a disclaimer. The webinar is being recorded. And one reason we want questions in the Q&A section is the chat feature is recorded, whereas the Q&A is not. So we try to maintain your privacy as best we can. The information provided during tonight's webinar does not constitute specific legal advice to you or your child's circumstances and should not be relied upon as such. It does not establish an attorney-client relationship with myself, attorney Lawrence Berliner, a professional relationship with Jane Faherty or Diane Ferber. And by signing up, you agree to keep receiving excuse me, receive information about future webinars from the Stamford JCC and or the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. The format that we're using is Zoom, which is a third-party provider. It's not associated with or an agent of the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, the Stamford Jewish Community Center, or Diane Ferber. So with that, I would like to begin with an introduction. We have Diane Ferber, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a school psychologist, and a founder of Therapy for Change, LLC, located in Stamford, Connecticut. Diane has an undergraduate degree from Brandeis University, graduate degrees from George Washington and Fairfield University in school psychology, marriage and family therapy. And she's licensed, I assume, by the Department of Public Health here in Connecticut, which I also might add to all of our friends and guests out of state and in some cases out of the country. Welcome. We try to focus on the laws of Connecticut and topics in general as best we can. We're going to be, this evening's topic involves resilience. And all of us, including Jane and I, have had to deal with resilience in the past 2.5 years of this pandemic. And the topics include coping with stress, self-reflection, supporting one another, reimagining yourself, demonstrating flexibility, which is something that I do each and every day, creating a positive home environment and sanctuary, encouraging parents to model positive behaviors, and being mindful that your children watch what you do, so we still have an effect on our children even when we don't realize. As I was preparing for tonight's webinar, I didn't realize that the Surgeon General, Murty, was providing testimony to Congress today, and he offered a couple of interesting quotes that I think dovetail nicely with tonight's topic. The Surgeon General said today that this pandemic has had a, quote, devastating impact on the mental health of America's young people. Quote, I'm deeply concerned as a parent and as a doctor that the obstacle this generation of young people face are unprecedented and uniquely hard to navigate, and the impact that it's having on their mental health is devastating. And this was today's testimony several hours ago, and it's just so contemporary as to what we've been dealing with as a community for the past 2.5 years now. So without further ado, Jane and I would like to introduce Diane. She can talk about her background if I've left something else, and get into tonight's topic.
The only thing I'd like to add to that is I'd be remiss if I didn't say I also see clients through Jewish Family Services in Stamford, and also through Redeem Wellness Center out in Bridgeport. Welcome, everybody. You know, this was such an interesting topic, and we were talking among ourselves before we went live on just how ridiculous a lot of our conversations would have been 2 years ago, talking about vaccines and mask mandates and closing schools, and the amount of flexibility that is being required of our children and of us and our employers. And one of the things that, you know, sort of goes unrecognized sometimes is the amount of resiliency and adaptability we've also managed to demonstrate. Because I think when you're in a crisis, you're not looking at the things that you're doing to sort of make it through and highlight those capabilities, but you're looking at the challenges that come. So taking that and kind of making that a more personalized statement, you know, this Zoom is an example of something that we wouldn't have really expected. We would have all been at the JCC. We would have all been in a room together. Certain people wouldn't have been able to attend because they had childcare situations or work barriers. And this is an opportunity for people who can be multitasking or eating at home or in the evening without going out to participate in this or get a copy of the recording of it. So the reach is greater. In my own practice, if you had asked me theoretically what I thought of teletherapy, I probably would have had a very different answer than I have now, having experienced a wider reach for my services through households, a better capability of people being able to get mental health services for their loved ones without having to leave the house, drive here, sit in an office with masks even. And I have found the sort of upside is that I get children to feel much more comfortable in their own setting and in their own rooms. And I've been able to have conversations with family members that I think would have been very resistant to the barriers of getting in their car and driving to my space. So again, we've all had to pivot and we've all had to be flexible. But I'm looking at sort of the pandemic with the stats. And, if you look at the statistics of today's testimony, it was really frightening. So the question is, what can we do, in our homes and with our children and even with our own burnout? And that is a question that we put in, so I will integrate it into my comments. That kind of will help just sort of set the stage. And, my thought is that we have a real opportunity here to change the way we look at mental health. And we have a real opportunity to change the conversation around self-care. So we know you go to a doctor for a checkup, but we've never gone to doctors for mental health checkups. We've never really talked stress and resiliency. Those aren't kind of conversations that we've had, but we have an opportunity here to sort of model for our children, put into place for ourselves, and encourage our children to do a lot more check-in of themselves, recognition of when they feel their coping strategies are being, sort of tapped out by the requirements that they have. And just to have more of these conversations and reach out and ask for help when they need it. So just kind of from a variety of places, the degree to which we can model self-care to our children at home, and especially because we're all spending so much more time together in smaller spaces, is really powerful. If we're running around and we are not taking care of ourselves and we're finding our voices hitting that screechy level because we're trying to do too many things, we can tell our children to relax and we can tell our children to take a break. But if we're not modeling it, we're not really helping, because our kids learn so much more by looking at us than what we tell them to do. So, one of the things that I found really helpful, and families I've worked with have instituted mental health check-ins at the end of the day. So 10 is like, you've had a great day, you're feeling on top of the world. And 1 is, wow, this is like really probably the worst day you've had in a while. And you kind of go, so where are you and what was your range today, for the older kids? So if the kid goes, I'm 6, 7, 8, you kind of can go, that's great. And you can institute conversations. It's so much easier than going to your teenager. How do you feel? How was today? Fine. A number opens up a conversation a different way. And if the range is 2 to 9, to follow it up. If, the range was like 6 to 8, you're good. Here's dinner, right? So that's a way that you start checking in with each other, and you can do it in a way that will kind of get by your child's defenses, but also prioritize the fact that you want a mental health check-in every evening around your family. Another thing might be to sort of just model flexibility and use those words, resiliency and flexibility. Like, I love the way you had that you took into stride the fact that you had a party at school planned today and school has been canceled because of COVID. For example, I love the way you handled and you were flexible around there. I love the resiliency that you showed in being able to change your plan and still get done what you wanted to do. I would introduce those words because I think sometimes when we use all of the danger words and all of the challenging words, we forget to demonstrate for them and ourselves the times when we do things right. And I'm going to try to be flexible here and let you go, even though you can't see your friends or we're in quarantine. So using those words brings everyone's attention to them. I also think, if we look at home, not just as like the place where we are, but creating a sort of sanctuary at home. And this is obviously hard at the kitchen table to do, but even for kids, teaching them, create a sanctuary in the corner of your room. And if the kids share a room, maybe they each get a corner. And what do you want in your sanctuary? What are some of the things that calm you down? What are some of the things that you like to do? So maybe it's got your animals and some books and some things. For teenagers, maybe that's where, they listen to music or they have some art supplies. But creating the idea of a sanctuary sort of models self-care. And for adults too, it's like, hey, time out, I'm going into my corner for 5 minutes. And rather than a punishment, we're now talking about that as self-regulation. So I think the sanctuary thing also models that. Deep breathing, if your children see you taking deep breaths and that you explain what you're doing, or you're flipping the way that you look at something, they'll start to see it and do it too. Kids, like if you change your breathing and slow it down, your kids will too. Everybody in the room does it. It's like an automatic, unconscious kind of thing. If you have really small children and then dysregulated, have them blow bubbles, because our parasympathetic nervous systems are set up so that if you're actually blowing out longer than you're breathing in, your brain calms you down. Different chemicals are released. So just even modeling that for kids, blowing bubbles and that kind of thing. But basically, you also have the capability of creating positive connections. I was talking to a parent today in a session who is like, I want to be the fun parent. And I'm like, okay, like what would that entail? And so much of us feel like, we're under siege and we're trying to juggle so much. But we can all figure out time and space to be the fun parent. Like we don't always have to be, the disciplinarian parent or the corrective parent. If we don't tell our kids to pick up their socks one day, it will not impact their ability to pick up socks as adults. But if we all sit down and go board game time, they'll remember that. So again, I think we all with our children need to kind of just focus on resilience, self-care, modeling mental health, modeling talking about it, I feel stressed, I feel happy, I feel sad, this is how I calm down, and just introducing that kind of resilient talk to our vernacular.
I think it's really interesting as well. As parents, I have friends, and I went away with some friends this past weekend. And one of them, their daughters are very significant with their challenges, and they have twins, and both of them are equally as challenged. And my friend said to me that she took a break away with us, and she said for the first time, she felt she had a glimpse of herself again. And it's very hard to hear somebody say that due to the stress, due to COVID, and just due to life and the overwhelming challenges they have as parents, which is exasperated by everything that has been endured the last 2 years, that a lot of people might be feeling disconnected with themselves and not feel in touch with who they are and who they were. So I think that the self-care can also help that, not just in the moment, but help you remember who you are and the things that make you you and the things that you enjoy. And I think that's so important as a parent, is not lose sight of yourself within the mix.
I love that. I think remembering who you are is absolutely a wonderful way to put that. Especially, let's say your sanctuary is what are the things that make you happy. So you get to remind yourself of the things that you like, and you get to bring those things into your home. I also think when you have, a special needs child who requires more active oversight, recognizing that sometimes changing the scene, going to the park, even getting another adult into the mix, can change the dynamic for you. And it's, you asking for help and you being willing to ask a friend for help or a family member for help, or just putting down what isn't working, remembering who you are, and, going and changing the scenery for you both. But I love the way that you said that.
Yeah, it's interesting. For her, it's even hearing a song and then just singing a song that she hadn't heard for many years made her reconnect to some of those thoughts and feelings. Having certain scents and fragrances that can resonate with you and take you back to remind you as to who you are. I think that we forget as parents as well that we are fully sensing, feeling beings, that are visual as well as our auditory, as well as our taste, and all of that comes into play to help us feel a particular way at any given moment as well.
And I think part of that is also prioritizing yourself, remembering who you are in your self-care. And just deciding one morning you're going to wake up and it's going to be like, I'm not going to worry about the following 5 things that will not change the outcome of the free world. But instead, today is all going to be about making sure we're fed, safe, and having fun. And if your kids see that, I remember my mom used to take me for mental health days to play hooky, because clearly weekends were not as much fun as playing hooky. Sorry, educators. But she would take me out and we'd go to the city for museum. And she's like, every once in a while, you just need to step out of what you're doing. And even though you're shirking responsibility, you're going to be held accountable for all the work you're missing. But it's just time for us to do something different. And, she would come home and sort of remember who she was and what she liked to be and the kind of mom she wanted to be. And, I definitely felt my stress level, change completely. So maybe that's something I can apply in a smaller space as well.
Now, the reset allows the conversation and the direction, to change, and it gets you, sometimes you can get some perspective as to what's really going on and what's really important. And I always tell my clients, make sure you take some time each day for yourself, because they're going from crisis to crisis to crisis, and they forget about themselves. So that's my advice to my clients each day. Diane, you talked about, in passing, one of the questions we had received, and that's about parents who are pretty much, burning out or experiencing burnout. Do you have any specific strategies? Because this time of, this past 2.5 years has just been unprecedented with the number of curveballs that have been thrown at families and their children, and I'm sure it's taking a toll.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. One is, I think when this first all occurred, we just thought we could hang on to the way we always did things and just kind of hold our breath for a minute. And, that was, sort of like, I will still get all of these things done. My child will still get all of their homework. We will still have, I will make up with tutors what they're not getting online. And it was like, because the way we're going to succeed is still the same way and everything else is the same. And I think as this went longer, a lot of those strategies that we put in place initially of we're still going to do all of it and we'll just throw extra time, effort at trying to keep everything working, and kind of became hard. I have a special needs nonverbal niece. And I remember the day that her mom just said, we're not logging on today. Like I physically cannot do that. And she gave herself permission not to be able to do it, and then called them and figured out the strategy that would work for them. But I remember, I think, talking to her that I realized every parent experiencing burnout gets to a point where they're just going to do everything harder and do all of those compensatory strategies they've always worked until this became a marathon and not a short-term obstacle. And that doesn't work. So there is something really magic about stopping. I think there's like a Buddhist thing that says, if you're struggling too hard, just stop moving for a moment. And then looking around and then deciding what to do differently, what you really need, what's working for you, what isn't working. And that self-reflective piece, I think, is also a part of resiliency, where you kind of can go, all right, what really is working here? What should I stop doing? The second thing is, I think parents have that lament of what they had experienced or they had put into place for their child that is no longer, the way the world is able to deliver it. And with the understanding that their child doesn't know the delta between your dream, expectation, or own experience and what they're experiencing. They only know what they're experiencing. So if you take that step back and just make whatever it is they're experiencing as joyful and easy and calm as possible, they don't know that you had something else in mind, or that your experience was different, or that your dream for them was different. They're very much day to day, and that's really helpful for adults in burnout to also learn to live day to day. If you're always thinking about what's going to happen, or you're freaked out about what's going to happen, you're spending today being freaked out about something that you don't really control and you're not there yet. But if you're as present with your child as you can be, and you kind of let tomorrow take care of itself, or next week, that space becomes better for everyone. And I think also just the burnout thing is really the self-care piece. The oxygen mask example has been used over and over, but it's because it's such a good one. You're in the plane and you're going down and there's no oxygen. You have to put it on your face first, so you are actually breathing and competent to save your children's lives. If you're trying to help everybody else, but you're not taking care of yourself, nothing's going to happen. So I think the burnout is sometimes our brain's way of telling us to sort of just stop for a minute, stop moving, reassess what we're doing, and figure out how we can get back to our balance and model that for our children at the same time.
How do some parents don't recognize that they're in burnout? It sometimes takes a partner or friend to say to them, I think you're at burnout mode. It's like the analogy of the boiling water. If a frog is in water and it's slowly getting hot, it doesn't notice that it's too hot to jump into. How can we recognize in friends and in our children when they have reached that burnout? What are some of the key indicators that that's happening and occurring?
Well, it's so interesting. It's a great question. I think it's different for adults and children, because I think for adults, especially parents who have had, children who require, special care. I have 2 children with IEPs, so I kind of know that world. You are used to being such a high level doer, problem solver, and it becomes almost a pride issue. It is your way of being. It is your role in your child's life. It is how you measure success. And I think for those of us who are full tilt, in it, it's really hard to recognize our own burnout, because one, it's admitting that we have a level after which we are not going to be as perfect as we want to be, or as on as we want to be. And we're the ones used to helping others and not asking for help. So I think by definition, parents who are in that position of fighting for their children and doing services and I put all parents of typical children in this during a pandemic, it's Herculean. It's hard to admit, forgetting whatever mental health stigma you may or may not have in your own belief system, that you have reached that point. And I think for those people, it's a very hard thing. And I know, for different times in my own life, again, I'm going to draw it on me. I remember there were moments where I just suddenly said, oh my God, that voice was me. Or, oh gosh, did I just do that? And I just sort of tell parents when I talk to them who like sort of say, well, I heard my voice do this, right? Hit a register. I didn't know it existed. I sort of say, okay, well, what is that telling you? So I think you learn to pay attention to that. Not just like, I can't think about this now. I've got dinner, I've got this, but it's sort of paying attention to it. And it's also taking the step back and recognizing your child doesn't have that wall. Your child is looking for you for self-regulation. So if the child is escalating and you're escalating, the child's going to escalate. You need to be the wall. And that's what children look to adults for and how they learn. So they're going to watch, one, when you provide the wall so they know it's safe to lean against it and come down because you're now calm. And two, they're going to look at how you identify it in yourself and self-soothe. So if you have a child that's having difficult, with burnout and I don't care if it's anxiety, I don't always mean behavior, but, even with anxiety, look at your own anxiety, recognize it, and then model, wow, I just did that. I must be sort of like tapped out right now. Let me think what actually soothes me. Let me do that. Give me a moment. Let's go back. And if you do that with your child, it's so powerful. So what I would say is listen to your loved ones who say, I'm concerned about you. It's not saying, I don't think you're doing well. It's not saying you're not competent. It's saying at this moment, the world is tapping all of us out and I'm concerned about you. And listen to it, accept it. And maybe that's also part of the gift of the pandemic is that some of the really strong achieving people learn to accept help and the interrelatedness of all of us.
Well, that's a very important point because when in the old days before March 2020, when we were in school or we were out in restaurants or in the community, we had all these external forces and influence on us that we might modulate our behavior or modulate the tone of our voice, but the more we become inward and isolated, some of those social breaks, external, forces have disappeared, and people don't understand perspective taking. What you're saying, may affect somebody else, and just because you're sitting behind the anonymity of a computer doesn't mean your words don't matter, or and it's so important that we maintain those connections, even if it's through the internet or even through the computer. And hopefully one of these days it'll be in person without any restrictions or fear with our health. So those are very, very important points for tonight's topic. One of the, and I don't know if it's still prevalent, but it was certainly prevalent when we were doing more so-called online instruction and learning, but it's keeping children engaged throughout this pandemic, talking, about ourselves and our social relationships, but their social relationships have been changed. You mentioned how to deal with disappointment, but kids are in school, but it's not the same like it was 2 years ago. So how do you keep them engaged as far as with their peers during this ongoing pandemic?
That's an excellent question. I think I read a study where they had estimated that in that year of like school closing down, children lost at least a year of social emotional maturity, and special needs kids lost even more of that. One of the things that I loved hearing about, and it's interesting how many families I talk to that have done this, is create a sort of pod with one or more other families. And this has also helped the adults and their burnout level as well, but it also helps the children because, in other words, it's a group of another family that the kids are constantly interacting, they're playing, you have protocols in place for both of you. You can bring your kids over there to each other's homes. It creates the opportunity for that interaction that having clubs closed down, having isolation at school, having lunchrooms closed down and eating at your lunch has really taken away. That sort of just, free play, interactive, social skill learning on how to navigate yourself at all levels of development, really, for children, I think is a big thing. The other part that you can do at home is, as part of maybe your family fun, is whatever the level of your child's capability is, to create some sort of family game night where there is turn taking and there's opportunity for chatter and sharing, and someone picks music. So an opportunity to practice social skills, even with adults, not as good as peers, but at least you're modeling turn taking and you're modeling patience and you're modeling good sportsmanship. So there's always activities you can do that way at home. But I do think as the world opens up, finding other families that you feel comfortable with and arranging as much time for those kids to interact as possible is going to be really important.
Yeah, it's really sad. In my program, I've had so many true COVID children, age 2, come into the program that have had no socialization whatsoever. The only interaction they've had have been with their immediate families, which might literally be the parents and maybe a sibling. A lot of them haven't even had the opportunity to connect with cousins or anybody beyond their household. So the opportunities to hopefully gradually and safely re-emerge with others, depending on everybody's comfort level, I think is vital, particularly for these younger ones, because they're missing out on so much play opportunity, peer role modeling, and just understanding the world around them. They've really missed out on some of those things that we always took for granted.
Absolutely. It's the difference between the children who had preschool programs and the children who didn't initially when they came in, about knowledge of sharing and knowledge of sitting still and two-step directions and even reading readiness. I think the homebound is really hard. I've seen a couple of parents try to do, even for the youngest kids. I apologize, I talk all day for a living, and that's obviously not holding up. They've tried to create Zoom play dates with mixed success. It depends, the child and how active, but not moderated, not lectured, but just 2 or 3 children who get to share their Legos that they made that day, even if it's like a half an hour. It at least creates sort of an idea of shared enjoyment, and next week you'll bring this, or show and tell, and someone has to explain what they made. So it does practice some of those skills, again, in a very artificial, I'm not saying it's a substitute, but it does do some of those things to keep friendships going, questions going, and just, an attachment going to someone outside of their own walls.
We have a relative who lives in Israel, and their young child will read to us through the Zoom connection as a way to break, I guess, their boredom. We enjoy it, but we can use the computer in a positive way for that.
The other one that we had a question on, Diane, was that in terms of children, so how can you explain to parents ways in which they can constructively have conversations with their child when the child takes that as criticism?
Sounds like that's a parent of a teenager.
I know. Although having said that, there are some very articulate 5- and 6-year-olds as well.
Okay. I think, so developmentally, I'm going to address it sort of around the preteen teen thing. And again, I think it's different for a younger kid. Contact me, we can have a conversation. But, developmentally, a preteen and a teen, their job is to become more independent, more self-thinking, pull away from their parents, to find themselves, in terms of their own thinking. I mean, that's their job developmentally. So yeah, we all expected, and overnight our really sweet, like lovable children often become strangers to us. And they're going to other people for advice, and it's really hard to say anything to them. So in that particular case, just recognize that they're still depending on you for safety and your insights and your wisdom. They just don't want to accept it from you or acknowledge it. So the question is, how do you have those conversations without kind of triggering them? So a couple of things that I've seen work really well are parents who will talk to their children in terms of asking questions. Just be curious. So instead of trying to fix it or give advice, like, so what happened then? What'd you try? How did that go? So just sort of prompting them through their process with real interest, not trying to fix it, not trying to judge it. You know, so I had to deal with my kids. I will not judge, just tell me what's going on. So, you know, but, you know, the parents who can just ask questions and not like go, oh my gosh, I hope they didn't do that. Or, oh, I know exactly what to do here. Let them just tell you about it. So let them tell you what what didn't work. So you're sort of like coaching them. And then if you really want to put in a question about what they could do, you might try something soft like, well, what do you think she'd do if, like, you said this? Like, what would happen if? So everything is sort of question and curious. Nothing is a closed statement. Nothing is, let me give you my wisdom. But, you know, I wouldn't have done that. Just all positive, all questions. And sometimes that kind of gets out of their radar. I also think where and when you decide to talk to your child is critical. Sitting your child down for a talk, or can you take your headphones off and get off with your friends for a minute so we can chat about this, is never going to end well. But I found that, like, kids in cars, when it's not face to face and they're not playing games and they're whatever, are a good time for parents to get kids to open up, especially if they're in the back. So it's not like a face to face and you're just kind of talking and casual. That's sometimes the best time to get your child's defenses down. So I would pick the when and the where carefully.
Should it also depend upon maybe which parent has, if there's two parents in a household, which parent has a conversation, or if a parent isn't comfortable but feels they need a conversation, there might be a relative that might be better suited to broaching some subjects?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you know that there's like a wall right now between one of the children and one of the parents right now, clearly getting somebody else to sort of broach a subject, especially if there's real concern. You know, our families are our extended families. You know, I always tell parents, you know, who are overwhelmed, that there is no manual that comes with it, but they should also trust their instincts, and, you know, have the confidence that they can kind of get through, and to recognize that sometimes the reaction they get doesn't mean their child didn't hear them. Mm-hmm. It just means their child isn't going to acknowledge or give them the gift of having heard them.
I like that expression.
We've had many, as I mentioned at the beginning, many questions that were unrelated to Diane's topic. And I just saw a suggestion in the chat room just to add a sensory break. Light up some incense was one person's suggestion. So that's low cost, and you can do it in the privacy of your home. And if you like it, it'll work. We've had a lot of questions that are unrelated to tonight's topic. And so I just wanted to try to answer a couple and have Jane answer a couple. One is the laws of Section 504 and the parents' rights in school. In this world of the internet, you can log in, just look in for special education. You'll find websites. Section 504, you'll find links to websites. The actual regulations are Title 34, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 104. And you'll see within those regulations one section that deals with schools. You may deal with employers, government agencies, et cetera, but there's one section that deals with schools. Another question, if I ask for a PPT meeting and the school hasn't responded to one, what do I do? Well, the answer is keep asking for it. And ultimately, you can ask the State Department of Education, which has a unit, the Bureau of Special Education, and they have individuals who are called consultants that will take a CRP complaint. That's a complaint resolution complaint. And often something like not getting a PPT meeting, it might take a phone call or two on the part of the State Department of Education to the local school district to get your PPT meeting.
I'd just like to add to that, Lawrence. I have so many parents that say, oh, I spoke to the teacher and they told me we would have one. I would go further and not just talk to them verbally, put it in writing, not only to the teacher, but maybe to the principal. If you are familiar with your PPT and the administrator that handles the PPTs, or even your special education director within your district. It's great that you're comfortable and able maybe to have a verbal conversation, but always follow through with the written so that you can then show that there was a paper trail, that the conversation did take place on this particular day and your request was a formal one because it was in writing. Sometimes parents just assume the verbal is enough of an agreement or a way to share information.
That's excellent advice, because that happens all too often where it's not that we doubt the conversation took place, we just can't prove it. And so that's where, if you've exhausted the internal remedies within the school administration, contacting the State Department of Education in writing, so you have a record, is also an opportunity to try to get some redress. Diane and Jane, I don't know if this comes up in your experience. We had a question again on retaining a child because they're not, I guess, doing well enough in school. Any thoughts or comments on that? Does that come up into your practice, Diane?
This is something that's been coming up more recently with COVID, and parents not feeling, they feel that their child has missed an opportunity because the school year hasn't been a typical year. The child's development hasn't progressed as much as they would hoped, and they're now concerned about the developmental gap between them and their peers broadening even larger. So I think this is a question that is increasingly coming up, or that parents are bringing up to districts. But it's not a question that districts relish receiving, and it's not conversations, in my experience, that they're particularly open to having. What I think is very important, again, it's about collecting data, tracking data of the progress of your child within the district, looking at the related services. What I have found recently is that there are a number of absences and positions vacant across all realms of education currently, with the great exodus, unemployment exodus. So a lot of districts might not have related service providers or enough teachers within the district, whether it's through quarantine because of COVID or other illnesses, or because they literally haven't got the personnel to fulfill those positions. So it's very important that we ask the questions as well: who is providing my child service, to ensure that those services are still being provided as detailed in the IEP, so that you can follow up and make sure that your child receives the support that they're entitled to and that's needed to ensure that the developmental gap between them and their other peers doesn't broaden, and that they're still able to make progress towards those IEP goals and objectives. What other suggestions, Diane and Lawrence, do you have?
So it's funny, I've heard that come up as actually, I used to hear, I want to skip my child. Now I hear I want to retain my child because I feel that they've missed the year. And I have heard, just situations where this, they're looking then at the scores of all the children and recognizing all the children are in the same boat. I guess really for my part, that's relevant that I have, I feel that I have expertise in is don't just look at the academic gaps, but look at the social emotional level of your child before you skip in on behalf of an academic, because you really are looking at the whole child. And if you don't take the social emotional development of the child, you could lose whatever you're trying to gain the other way.
I concur. I have 4 children. They're now much older. I have 2 in high school and now 2 that are studying overseas. And as parents, it's really hard to watch your children struggle academically, and everybody's struggle is different. But we can't lose sight of that social emotional development and role models and peers. And I have found over the years, not only with my own children, but looking at their friends, when there's such a large gap anyway, a lot of parents might be holding their children back. One of my children is the youngest in the school district by at least 18 months for the majority of those in their grade. But they've done well. They've kept up with the social piece. For some of those that are much older at the other end of the spectrum, it's been really hard for them to see younger students excel or have the same grades as them academically. It could be in the sports field. And then they feel a pressure when they're the first ones to be able to drive their peers, or they want to have different social experiences that maybe their peers aren't ready for. So as Diane says, we have to, as much as we talk about being in the moment, you must stay in this moment with your child. Don't project too far forward. But at some point, if you're talking about school retention, Diane, you could say differently, but at that point, it is important to look slightly further ahead at the impact that retention might have for your child socially, emotionally, as well as academically.
Yeah, I think it's also the ability to step back and take a very realistic look at your child in totality, exactly where they are, and see how much of that, sort of project out what is likely to happen versus what it is you're hoping will happen or are afraid will happen. And I know, there are definite differences in different classes. Sometimes you have a very young class, sometimes you have a very mature class. But, in general, your child can catch up is one option and still stay with their, emotionally, social, appropriate peers. It's just really looking at the whole child.
We've had a couple of questions about communication, options for a nonverbal child, for speech therapy, and we've had a question come in during the webinar. Can the district only have goals for a student with a language impairment that they simply self-advocate when they need assistance? On the second question, the IEP is supposed to be based upon the child's needs, unique needs, and that's in Connecticut shows up on the present level of academic and functional performance pages, and one section deals with communication. And if the goals in the IEP are not harmonized with the student's actual needs, the area of weakness, ask for a PPT meeting, a pupil planning team meeting. If necessary, get some evaluations to support your concerns that the IEP goals are not comprehensive enough. If it's just about self-advocacy and there's a need for more direct assistance, I would suggest an evaluation, but certainly discussing this with the teacher, the speech and language pathologist, as well as, if necessary, getting an evaluation. And that sort of dovetails to the other question, what options does a nonverbal child have for speech therapy? The answer is, how high is up? The school district is supposed to help students access all areas of their life, including communication. And in this world of technology, sometimes we rely on technology as communication. Sometimes there are, I've had students who have selective mutism. There's some kind of anxiety that needs to be overcome with therapy to help them come out of that isolation. And sometimes it's a certain specialized type of speech and language therapy. I guess my bottom line is don't give up, ask, research, get evaluations, trust your instincts.
I'd just like to add to that. So in the program and the work that I do, I work with numerous children that are nonverbal. Some of them may be nonverbal for a prolonged period of time, whereas others, the language might be emerging, might be intonation, approximation, but you can see that it's starting to emerge. I'm very fortunate that I work with tremendously experienced and wonderful speech pathologists. And more recently, I've partnered up with an organization called STAR, who actually are going to be having at some point an assistive tech lending library, which is going to be partnered up with speech pathologists to do reviews and evaluations. And then there's a technical expert there that's also going to help. I have worked with children that have used the visual scanning devices to help them communicate in words as well as sentences. In our program, we start with switches and buttons, which we can program, and we support the children through play to start with. They learn that by pressing a switch, a light goes on. You then transition to that switch saying things like more or all done, and you build up the repertoire of vocabulary. You can then move on to some really wonderful devices that are low tech, where a child would use the PECS pictures. And as they touch the PECS picture, you can determine how many there are in their visual field to start them to help to explain what their needs and communicate their needs and wants. You can then transition to iPads, and there's a variety of different types of software that can be reviewed and evaluated based upon your individual child, how they respond to that information, visual information presented in front of them, whether they're able to use pictures or whether they can use, need photos of real objects. So all I'd say is, please don't give up. If your child is nonverbal, there will be other ways within which you can support them to communicate their needs and wants. Communication isn't always traditional verbal. We do it in lots of other different ways. And as Lawrence said, technology is a tremendous thing. And there's a lot more different variations of technology available today than even there were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. It keeps evolving and moving forward, just as the iPhones keep updating all the time. So does this software and technology. But STAR would be an organization that are starting to place a lot of focus and emphasis on this. There are others as well within Fairfield and throughout the US and the world, I'm sure. But speak to your pathologist. And if you're in a school district, you can ask and request an assistive tech evaluation too. And there are specialists, there should be specialists in the district. They're able to conduct those evaluations and help you determine through trial and error quite often which system and methodology and mode of communication is going to be most suitable for your child. And as your child progresses, you'll find that the software and maybe the program evolves and progresses with your child too. So don't lose despair. Technology can be a wonderful support when helping others learn to communicate.
I see that we're approaching 8 o'clock, which is our usual time to end the webinar. So I want to thank Diane for very thoughtful presentation and strategies that I hope that were useful. We will continue these conversations throughout the school year. We will keep a watchful eye on special education issues, COVID-19 vaccine related issues. We're about to get some new guidance on mask mandates. That'll probably be out before our next webinar, which is on March 9th, same time, 7 o'clock. And our special guest will be Brian Klimowitz, if I pronounced his name correctly, who is the bureau chief from the Connecticut Department of Education. Jane and I have been talking throughout this past year about the coming changes to the IEP document. And Brian is leading the charge at the state level to revise the IEP form. And I'd like to have his perspective on how this new change, other than the font size, that was my comments to the task force, to increase the font size, which they did, how this is going to help parents be better advocates for their children and know what's going on with the IEP. So we'll have Brian on March 9th. Again, we welcome your questions. And if there are any additional guidelines coming from the Department of Education by that time, we'll ask Brian to go over them as well. If you are enjoying these conversations, please do not hesitate to register in the chat area, send your questions to us. We hope we got to as many questions this evening. From me, last and most important, I want to thank my daughter, Rachel, who has put together all of these webinars from the very beginning. Without her technology prowess, emails, getting people the information they need before, during, and sometimes after the webinars, we could not, Jane and I could not have the success that we've had over the past two plus years with these webinars. So if you watch the Facebook page, the websites, the JCC website, the JCC Facebook page, you'll get more information about upcoming events. So I want to thank you for your attention and attending this evening, and I'll leave it to Jane and Diane for their closing and concluding remarks.
I'd just like to thank Diane for her sage advice and wisdom. And I think it's really important to check in with ourselves as well as our family members and our children in terms of their stress and how they're feeling, particularly at this very difficult time. But also, if you do want an outlet that's fun and connecting with others in the community, check out the JumpStart Facebook page. We have some fun in-person recreational activities happening. I think on the 18th of February, Friday evening, we have axe throwing, a good way to release some stress and tension, where you can connect with other parents. But we have lots of fun activities happening throughout the year. So please check out that page and take care of yourselves. And I wish you all the best over the next few weeks before we see you again. But thank you, and thank you, Lawrence and Diane.
First, I just wanted to thank both of you for the series of these that you put on. They are informational, they are warm, they are genuine, and you do an amazing community service by both the depth and breadth of the things that you address and also your work in special ed. Just as a parent of two children who went through an IEP process, I know how overwhelming it can be for parents, and the two of you are amazing. For everybody out there, I wish you strength and peace and health. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you need help. If it's not me you need help, but you're looking for some sort of support that just has to do with mental health, contact me. I will do my best to network and refer you and help you out. But I really just believe in this time, we are all connected. We are one big community and we need to be able to support each other. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Well, thank you so much. And we couldn't do it without having experts on the panel such as yourself. And that's what we try to do, is to bring in various professionals with expertise to try to address what seems to be a never-ending set of challenges for parents, their children, and I'll even do a shout out for teachers who are trying to do their best. Well, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.